Most sales compensation plans were not truly designed. They accumulated over time, and when incentive logic is left unmanaged, it quietly shapes behavior, cost, and trust. There is a question I asked almost every company when we start talking about sales compensation. It sounds simple, but it's really easy to answer. When was your sales compensation plan last designed? I do not mean when it was last updated, reviewed, copied into a new spreadsheet, or adjusted because something had to be fixed before the new financial year. I mean, when it was truly designed from the beginning with intention, with strategy, and with a clear understanding of what the business was trying to achieve. Most of the time, when I ask that question, there is a short pause. Then someone says, well, we review it every year. And I understand that answer because most companies do review their plans every year. They update targets, check commission rates, adjust quotas, change a threshold, add a measure, or remove a measure, or even simplify a few pages in the plan documents. But reviewing a plan is not the same as designing one. A review usually starts with a question: what should we change this year? Design starts somewhere deeper. It asks, why does this plan exist in this form? And what behavior is it meant to create? That is where today's episode begins. Welcome to Sales Comp Decoded, the stories behind how companies pay people to sell. I am Abimbola, and today we're starting with a plan nobody admits was never designed. Imagine a mid-sized B2B company preparing for a new sales year. The business is growing, but not as clean as leadership would like. Revenue has increased, yet commission costs have grown faster than expected. Some sellers are earning very well, but not always from the kind of growth the company now wants. Finance is asking whether the plan has become too expensive. Sales is saying the team still needs stronger upside. HR is concerned that the plan is becoming harder to explain, and the CEO wants a simple answer to a difficult question. Are we rewarding the right kind of performance? On the surface, this sounds like a normal annual compensation review, the kind of meeting many companies have before a new plan year begins. So the team got the documents. There is a PDF from a few years ago. Everyone referred to it as the official plan. There is also a spreadsheet, which is the file people actually use to calculate payouts. Then there are email threads with approvals, exceptions, clarifications, special cases, and decisions that somehow never made it back into the main plan documents. At first, none of this feels unusual. In many companies, this is simply how things work. People solve problems, they respond to pressure, they keep the business moving. A rule is clarified here, a threshold is adjusted there, a special case is approved because the situation feels urgent and the business cannot wait. But once you start reading carefully, something becomes clear. The PDF tells one story, the spreadsheet tells another, and the email history explains a third version of the truth. Slowly, the compensation plan begins to reveal itself, not as one clean design, but as layers of decisions stacked on top of each other. One layer came from a year when the company needed to protect top performance. Another came from a period when finance was under pressure to reduce costs. Another came from a product launch that needed more sales attention. Another came from a territory dispute that had to be resolved quickly. And yet, another came from a regional leader who argued, perhaps correctly, that their market worked differently. Each decision had a reason, and that is the important part. This was not carelessness, it was not incompetence. It was not the result of people who did not understand the business. In the moment, each decision probably made sense. The accelerator may have been added because the company wanted to keep strong sellers motivated. The threshold may have been changed because the business needed more cost protection in a difficult quarter. The product bonus may have been introduced because a new line needed attention, while the territory adjustments may have been made because one market really was unfair. The exception may have been approved because the alternative was losing trust with a key salesperson. The problem was not each decision on its own. The problem was that no one stepped back and asked what all those decisions now meant together. No one asked whether the full plan still matched the company's current strategy. No one tested whether the accelerators, the threshold, the bonus, the quota structure, and the exceptions were working together or quietly working against each other. No one asked whether the plan was still rewarding the kind of selling the company needed now, rather than the kind of selling it needed 3 years ago. By the time leadership looked closely, the plan was no longer a clean expression of strategy. It had become an archive of old decisions, some still useful, some forgotten, some temporary, but still active. Some made for good reasons in a business reality that no longer existed. And that is how many sales compensation plans are created. They do not always begin from a blank page. They do not always come from a deliberate design conversation that connects business strategy, role expectations, measures, mechanic, modeling, and communication. More often, they accumulate. A new VP of sales inherits a plan and changes one part because the team is happy. A new CFO inherits the same plan and changes another part because the cost is outside the budget. A new HR leader inherits it and adjusts the wordings because the rules are hard to defend. A regional leader asks for a local variation because their market is different. A product team asks for a bonus because they need sales focus, whilst a manager requests an exception because one rep has a special situation. None of these people may be wrong, but over time, the plan carries the fingerprints of many decision makers and the strategy of none of them. That is what I call the inheritance problem. And if you are an executive, this is where the issues become bigger than compensation. Because sales compensation is not just how you pay people, it is one of the strongest management signals in the business. It tells sellers what to focus on when they have more opportunities than time. It tells managers what to coach when performance is under pressure. It tells the field what kind of revenue matters most. It tells people how much risk the company expects them to carry. It tells them what the business truly values when choices have to be made. And people listen to that signal. They may not remember every line from the annual strategy deck. They may not quote the CEO message from the sales kickoff. They may not visit the company priorities every morning before opening their CRM, but they know what pays. And when the strategy says one thing, but the compensation plan rewards another. The compensation plan usually wins. This is why a design plan can become expensive long before the cost appears clearly in the numbers. The obvious cost is financial. Commission expenses rises faster than expected. A strong quota becomes uncomfortable because nobody modeled what would happen if more sellers landed above targets. Accelerators combine with bonuses in a way no one tested. The threshold protects the company in one scenario but punishes reasonable performance in another. A product bonus increases payouts without creating the profitable growth leadership expected. In isolation, each mechanic may look manageable, but sales compensation is a system, and systems behave according to their actual design, not their intended design. That is why one small change can alter the economics of the whole plan. Adding an accelerator without revisiting the threshold changes the risk and reward pattern. Adjusting territory splits without recalibrating quota changes who has a realistic chance of success. Introducing a product bonus without checking whether the main commission measure conflicts with it creates two competing signals inside the same plan. And when the plan sends competing signals, sellers will usually follow the stronger economic one. That does not make them wrong. It means the plan is doing exactly what incentive plans are built to do. They direct attention, they shape choices, they make some behaviors more attractive than others. If the plan rewards speed, people move towards speed. If it rewards volume, people move towards volume. If it rewards margin, people pay attention to margin. If it rewards new business far more than retention, people behave accordingly. So when a plan rewards something the strategy no longer wants, the business should not be surprised when the field continues to do so. But the deeper cost is not only financial, it is trust. A sales compensation plan depends on trust more than many leaders realize. Seller needs to believe that the plan is clear enough to understand, stable enough to rely on, and fair enough to accept even when they do not love every outcome. When that trust weakens, the plan loses power. A seller who cannot understand the plan may still receive a payout and check the number when it arrives, but they stop using the plan as a guide when they are selling. They do not look at a deal and clearly understand what it is worth to them. They do not know whether a bigger deal, a longer contract, a different product mix, or a renewal motion will meaningfully change their earnings. At that point, the plan becomes something that explains payments after the deal has closed, instead of something that shapes behavior before the deal is made. That distinction matters. A strong incentive plan influences behavior before the sale happens. An unclear plan only calculates payment after the fact. And when people no longer trust the official plan, they create their own version of truth. They build shadow spreadsheets. They compare payouts. They ask other sellers what happened to them. They test the rules. They ask managers questions the managers are not prepared to answer. They look for patterns, inconsistencies, and exceptions. At that point, the company is no longer only managing compensation, it is managing interpretation. And interpretation can become expensive because when the official plan is not clear, people fill the gap themselves. They rarely fill it with the most generous explanation, they fill it with suspicion. They wonder who benefited, who knew, whether the rule was applied consistently, whether leadership really understands the field, and whether the system is fair. This is why the sentence, That is how we have always done it. It's not endless. It may sound practical. It may even sound efficient. But in sales compensation, it is often a warning signal because it means the company may be paying according to logic it can no longer explain. And when a company cannot explain why a rule exists, that rule becomes fragile. Maybe not today. Maybe not when performance is strong. Maybe not when payouts are high. But the moment there's pressure, the weakness appears. A seller misses a payout by a small margin and asks why the threshold is set where it is. A manager asks why two similar roles have different mechanics. Finance asks why the cost is higher than expected. HR asks whether the plan is defensible. Leadership asks whether the incentives still support the strategy. Suddenly, an old decision needs a new explanation. But the person who made the decision had left. The business context may have changed. The email may have been buried somewhere. The spreadsheet may have gone through 5 different versions. And the official document may no longer reflect what is actually happened. And that is how a plan becomes a trust problem. Not because the company intended to be unfair, but because the company allowed the rationale to disappear. And once the rationale disappears, even the reasonable rule can begin to look arbitrary. This is why leaders need to distinguish between a plan that has been reviewed and a plan that has been designed. A reviewed plan may update the numbers, while a design plan checks whether the logic still makes sense. That difference is not academic. It affects how people sell, how much the company pays, how managers communicate, and how finance forecasts costs, how HR defend fairness, and whether the plan can survive scrutiny when someone asks a difficult question. And that scrutiny is only increasing. Companies are under pressure to show more discipline, explain decisions more clearly, manage costs more carefully, retain talent, prove fairness, operate across markets, and use data and technology more intelligently. Employees are also asking better questions about pay. A plan that was merely inherited is not built for that level of pressure. It may still function, pay people on time, and appear stable, but if the business cannot explain the logic behind it, the plan is carrying hidden risk. So, what should executive do? The answer is not throwing everything away immediately. That is often the next mistake. A company discovers the plan is messy, rushes into design without first understanding what the current plan is actually doing. So, before you redesign, you need to diagnose. The work begins by making the real plan visible. This means looking beyond the clean version people wish existed and bringing together the official documents, the working spreadsheets, the payout files, quota adjustments, territory changes, crediting rules, exception history, and ill-made decisions that quietly became parts of the operating reality. Once everything is visible, the plan can be read almost like a story. What is this plan telling the sales organization? Is it telling people that profitable growth matters? Or is it treating every euro of revenue as equal? Is it encouraging strategic selling? Or is it quietly rewarding whatever closes fastest? Is it supporting retention? Or is it signaling that new business is the only work that really counts? This is where the real audit begins, not only with whether the formula works, but with whether the plan tells the same story as the strategy. When I want to understand whether a company is running a design plan or an inherited one, I listen closely to how people explain it. If sales, finance, HR, and leadership cannot describe the intention, In the same basic way, the plan is already carrying tension inside it. Sales may see it as a growth engine, finance may see it as a cost control mechanism, HR may see it as a fairness framework. Each view may be valid, but if the company has never brought those views together, the plan will eventually pull in different directions. The same thing happens when there is no single source of truth. If the official plan sits in a PDF, the actual calculation sits in a spreadsheet, and the latest decisions are buried in email threads, people will eventually choose the version that supports their interpretation. That is not because they are trying to be difficult. It is because the business has allowed the plan to exist in fragments. Exceptions tell their own story as well. One exception may be reasonable, two may be explainable, but when exception keeps appearing without clear rationale, they slowly become a second compensation plan operating underneath the first one. That is when fairness questions begin, because people are no longer only asking what the rule is, they are asking who gets relief from the rule, who approved it, and whether the same logic would apply to them. The point is not to embarrass anyone. It is to become honest about what the business is actually running, because a company cannot improve a plan it has not truly seen. That is why the work should start with intention before it moves to the rates. The accelerator or the bonus. The company has to understand what kind of selling it wants to create, what kind of revenue it wants more of, how much risk it expects seller to carry, what managers must be able to explain, what finance must be able to model, and what HR must be able to defend, and ultimately, what the seller should understand before a deal is closed. Only then can the company ask the more uncomfortable question: what are we no longer willing to reward? That question is powerful because every good compensation plan is not only a decision about what to reward, it is also a decision about what to stop rewarding. If the company wants profitable growth, it may need to stop treating all revenue the same way. If it wants better retention, it may need to stop treating renewal work as secondary. If it wants more strategic selling, it may need to stop over-rewarding short-circle wins. If it wants trust, it may need to stop allowing exceptions that no one can explain. This is where sales compensation becomes more than an annual document. It becomes a leadership choice. This is a practical exercise I would recommend before any major redesign. Pull every meaningful compensation-related decision made in the last 2 years, including changes that affect accelerator, threshold, quotas, crediting, territories, product bonus, payout timing, eligibility, and special approval. Then write one sentence beside each decision explaining the business problem it was solving. Do not judge the decision yet. Just capture the reason. When the full history is in front of you, read it as one story. If the decision connects to a clear direction, you may have a plan that has evolved with intention. But if the history reads like a series of unrelated fixes, then you have discovered accumulated logic. That history may tell you more than the spreadsheet, because the spreadsheet shows what people are paid, while the decision history shows why the plan became what it is. And that is where design work begins, with honesty about what the plan currently rewards, which rules still make sense, which exceptions have become informal policy, which behavior the company is paying for without meaning to, and whether the plans still reflect the business the company is becoming or the business it used to be. That is why the plan nobody admits was never designed. matter so much. It can look normal, it can function, it can pay accurately according to the rules. It can survive for years, but underneath, it may be carrying yesterday's priorities into today's markets. It may be rewarding the behavior the company no longer wants. It may be creating costs the company did not model. It may be creating fairness questions the company is not ready to answer. It may be asking manager to explain logic they did not design. And it may be asking seller to trust a system that leadership itself cannot fully explain. So here is the signal for this week. Ask one question in your next compensation review. When was this plan last designed? If the answer is clear, you have a foundation to build from. If the answer is vague, do not panic, but do not ignore it either. Start with the decision history. Find the old changes, exceptions, hidden assumptions, and parts of the plan that still reflect a business you used to be, rather than the business you're becoming. Because many compensation problems do not begin with the payouts. They begin much earlier when the business keeps paying according to a logic it no longer fully understands. That is the plan nobody admits was never designed. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Next week, we will look at something even more uncomfortable. Your compensation plan is saying things about your company, about what you value, about who you trust, and about what kind of performance you truly reward. And it is saying those things whether you wrote them down or not. I am Abimbola, and this is Sales Comp Decoded, the stories behind how companies pay people to sell. If this episode made you think differently about your own plan, share it with one person in sales, finance, or HR who should be part of that conversation. Because when its compensation plan fails, the spreadsheet is really the first thing to break.